So, Dr. Vyshedskiy, we've never met before, but I actually ran across your research in an article I was reading that was talking about kind of new developments in language evolution, new perspectives. And so I thought it'd be interesting to invite you to give an EvoS lecture. So I'm very glad you agreed to join us here, even if it's remotely. And language evolution, I talked about this a little bit last time in class. This is in anthropology, of course, not where most people that study language evolution actually work. They're not really anthropologists, even though in anthropology, we have kind of 4 traditional subfields: biological, cultural, linguistic anthropology, and archaeology. The evolution of language is one of those questions that really can be approached from all of those perspectives. And so we can think about when did it appear, right? That's the big question. When did humans start having symbolic language like today? Because that will mean our mind was the same as it is today at that point too. That's why it's significant evolutionarily and culturally for anthropologists. Dr. Vyshedskiy has a different perspective. He's not an anthropologist, but he has worked on more kind of the cognitive side of things, and I will let him develop his ideas here today. He is a neuroscientist at Boston University, has authored over 100 review articles and research publications in premier journals of the world, including New England Journal of Medicine and Nature. His research focuses on children development, the neurological basis of imagination, and the evolution of human language. Wow, 3 simple questions there, right, to look at. I'm sure there's very clear answers to all of those. He's founded multiple successful companies in his spare time and directed the development of several FDA-approved medical devices. Based on his research, Imagination has designed a novel therapy for children that have been demonstrated to significantly improve their language ability. So I won't take up more time. I'll let Dr. Vyshedskiy explain to his ideas about language comprehension, development, and evolution. And then we will have some question and answer afterwards. Okay? So please, Dr. Vyshedskiy, go ahead and feel free to share your screen. And we should.
Yeah, Rolf, thank you so much for this introduction. I'll share my screen and turn on the slides.
Okay, perfect.
You can see my slides.
Yes. Yes, perfect.
Very good. Can you switch it so that I can see the audience?
Let's see.
I don't like monologues. I like to.
Yes, I can change this. You can see the audience. Yes.
Otherwise, I will put people to
Yes.
sleep.
There we go.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Rolf. Very good, guys. Well, here is the lecture on 3 separate steps of human language evolution. And we start with big questions. What kind of questions we are trying to answer? Well, chimps and bonobos can learn hundreds of words, right? It has been shown again and again. And the question, of course, is why don't they acquire full language? And nobody seems to have an answer to that. Next question is close to you as archaeologists and anthropologists. Mode 1 tools have been manufactured since at least 3 million years ago, and Mode 2 tools have been manufactured since 2 million years ago, but nobody seemed to be able to explain the stasis. Why weren't our ancestors able to manufacture Mode 2 tools earlier, or Mode 1 tools earlier? Another question is, well, we know that speech apparatus starts to emerge about 2 million years ago, and Neanderthals probably attained a modern speech apparatus. The question is why Neanderthals weren't able to attain the same cognitive abilities that modern humans have. So why Neanderthals were different? So all of these questions are mixed. And so there are 2 language camps. And in the one camp, gradualists like Daniel Everett, they think that language is mediated by many mechanisms, and those mechanisms evolve gradually, incrementally, over at least 2 million years. And of course, in the other camp, are so-called saltationists, from the Latin word saltare, jump. And saltationists like Noam Chomsky, they argue that modern language emerged suddenly around 100,000 years ago, maybe as a result of a single mutation. The neurobiological model that I will present today predicts that there should be 3 steps in language evolution. And I will present some empirical data, and it is for you to judge who is right, or maybe everybody is right. So let us go to cognitive neuroscience model. As you know, human brain is separated into the back and the front by the central sulcus. The back of the brain, called posterior cortex, is all sensory. This is the part of the brain that encodes all your perceptions, all faces, all colors, all sounds, everything is that you sense, that you perceive, is encoded in the back. Well, you can ask, why do I need the other half of the brain? Why do I need the frontal part? Well, the frontal part is all motor. The motor cortex moves your muscles, it controls your muscles, skeletal muscles, and the prefrontal cortex controls the neuronal ensembles in the posterior cortex. The frontal cortex does not encode any sensory information at all. It is all action cortex. So it's all organized in a very simple manner. I don't know why people don't teach this simple cognitive neuroscience view, but this is how it is. All the vision and sound and some other sensory sensation and so on, all of that is encoded in the back, and the motor and the front is all motor. The same thing in the spinal cord. The front of the spinal cord is all motor, the back is all sensory. All right, why is that important to us? That is important to us because to understand language, the neural ensembles in the back of the cortex have to be manipulated by the prefrontal cortex. So let us first look at the organization of visual information in the posterior cortex. So this is our posterior cortex, and this is the primary visual cortex, and all the information from the retina is sent to the primary visual cortex, the V1, in the back of your brain. And you're probably familiar with it. If you ever fell back on your head, right, if you, I don't know, fell back, you have stars coming off your eyes. These stars are coming out, you see in these phosphenes, because you physically, mechanically stimulated the primary visual cortex, all right? So you know with your body where your primary visual cortex is. Now, there are 2 streams of pathways how information is processed in the neocortex. The ventral stream, from Latin word ventralis, belly, and the dorsal stream, from dorsalis, back. So the ventral stream is encoding the shape, size, and color of objects. And the dorsal stream encodes where the objects are in space and their spatial relationship. In other words, the ventral part is encoding what the object is. Literally, you have these neurons. The neural ensembles are basically these groups of neurons. approximately one object is encoded by 1,000,000 neurons. And we try to indicate these neurons with light bulbs or stars. And they're all connected by enhanced connections. So when you envision an apple, the 1,000,000 neurons that encode the apple are firing up in synchrony in your neocortex. The only way for you to envision an apple is for these 1,000,000 neurons in your neocortex to fire up in synchrony. And if you're interested in how these objects are encoded, you should look at Rafa Yusta papers and Jeff Hawkins' papers. The first one was investigating this experimentally, and the latter one has been modeling this for over 30 years. So this is standard information that people study in Neuroscience 101 that has been known for at least 100 years. Now, something new. We're going to try to understand how does the prefrontal cortex control objects in the posterior cortex. And this control is only possible because there are neural tracts, the axons, the white matter that connects the prefrontal cortex and the ventral stream, prefrontal cortex, and the dorsal stream. This is the fibers that allow the prefrontal cortex to control, to move, to administer action, just like you move your muscles, right? You can move your muscles with the motor cortex. You can move your neuronal ensembles with the prefrontal cortex. It's extremely simple. Actually, everything I've been talking about today is extremely simple. So again, arcuate fasciculus was known for a long time as well. This is nothing new. In chimps, arcuate fasciculus is very weak and short. And this is the new stuff. Maybe it is known for the last 20 years. As a result, the prefrontal cortex cannot really control the neural ensembles in the posterior cortex. So you can teach a chimp words, right? Because, for example, you say apple and the chimp imagines an apple. All of that is confined to the posterior cortex. The words are heard by the temporal lobe. The Wernicke's area associates the words with the image that is encoded in the temporal lobe and the occipital lobe, and boom, the chimp understands what you want from it. And the same goes from the dog and the cat, and you can teach them words. Because all of that is encoded in the posterior cortex. You don't need the prefrontal cortex. Again, in the chimp's brain, the prefrontal cortex is very poorly connected to the posterior cortex. No matter what you do to the chimp, you cannot really make this arcuate fasciculus longer, better, at least not as bad, not as good as in humans. All right, any questions so far? All right, so when arcuate fasciculus innervates the ventral stream, remember in the ventral stream, we encode shape, size, and color of objects. And so logically enough, prefrontal cortex is capable to control the shape of object, the size of object, and the color of objects that you imagine. So you can imagine your car in blue, red, green, yellow, any color you want. You can imagine your car bigger. You can imagine your car smaller. You can imagine your car is slightly different shape. This mechanism is called prefrontal modification, or PFM, prefrontal modification. The prefrontal cortex literally, actively, deliberately modifies the encoding of a single object in your brain, and you perceive a different object, right? Can you guys imagine your car in blue? Good. Very good. Then you have prefrontal modification. All right, pretty logically, when arcuate fasciculus innervates both the ventral stream and the dorsal stream, then the prefrontal cortex can juxtapose multiple objects. For example, you can imagine an apple on top of a dolphin. Or you can imagine me upside down on the table in front of you. This is because the prefrontal cortex can actively synchronize the neural ensembles in the posterior cortex. So for that, you need neurons in the VOT stream, the ventral stream, and you need neurons in the dorsal stream. Basically, you need whole of the posterior cortex, almost whole, to synchronize the neurons of the dolphin and of the apple. And then the apple is interacting with the dolphin. So this is called prefrontal synthesis, because the prefrontal cortex is synthesizing multiple objects, or PFS. So this is the new stuff. This is what I invented. But so far, so good, right? It all makes sense. So this is our cognitive neuroscience model. There is nothing more to it. When you don't have arcuate fasciculus, or when it is very weak and short, prefrontal cortex cannot control objects in the posterior cortex. When the arcuate fasciculus only goes as far as the ventral stream, you can only change one object. You can change its color, size, or shape. And when the arcuate fasciculus is very developed, it goes to all the neurons of the posterior cortex, more or less. You can additionally control the location of objects, and this gives you prefrontal synthesis. That's all the cognitive model I'm going to talk about. So from this, we can predict what the three types of language phenotypes should be. The first phenotype is the command phenotype. You only understand commands. When the arcuate fasciculus is short and weak, you cannot change any objects in the posterior cortex. And therefore, the only thing you can do, you can match an image to a word. So you can understand the command, give me a pencil. That's the best you can do. Now, when the arcuate fasciculus reaches the ventral stream, and then you have prefrontal modification. You can modify a single object, and you should have a modifier phenotype. You will understand, give me a yellow car, give me a red car, give me a blue car, give me the big red car, give me the small blue pencil out of many straws, pencils, and many other objects. You can also imagine the biggest pencil, the smallest pencil, the biggest red straw, and so on and so forth. That is the modifier phenotype. All right? And finally, if your arcuate fasciculus is big and strong, as I'm sure it is in all of you, you have prefrontal synthesis, and then you should have syntactic phenotype. You should understand full language. You should understand stories, spatial prepositions, and so on. So this is our three language phenotypes: command, modifier, and syntactic. And they only depend on arcuate fasciculus. All right? Very good. And this is what I predicted almost 20 years ago in this book. I published it, and I thought, well, everybody should be really excited about it. And it's 20 years now, and nobody seemed to be very excited except Rolf. But thank you, Rolf, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to present this data. Well, why Rolf is excited? Rolf is excited because we have some data. So what kind of data we have? Let me show you the data. And have you guys watched this TED video? Good. Because if you didn't, that's a good time to watch it. But you did watch it, right? Perfect. Perfect. So this is where the data is coming from. Well, this is the logic. In some modern individuals, genes regressed their ancestral functionality, causing underdevelopment of the arcuate fasciculus. This is inevitable. Every one of us is experiment of nature. Every one of us has more than 10 novel mutations, and the nature just trying doing an experiment on us, whether you want it or not. So some people are good experiments, some people are not so good experiments. So we can look at the modern individuals whose genes regressed, and we should be able to find individuals whose arcuate fasciculus didn't grow enough. We should find these individuals with modifier phenotype, and we should find these individuals with the command phenotype. All right, let's look for them. So this is the one paper that you've read, I believe. Good. And this is another paper that we published. This paper is clinical, the other paper is cognitive neuroscience, just different perspective on the same data, more or less the same data. What did we do? We gave people a set of questions. Actually, we didn't give it directly to these individuals because these individuals don't understand full language. These are individuals with language deficits, all kinds of deficits. These are people with Down syndrome. These are people with autism. These are people with very severe ADHD, all kinds of language disorders. We gave questions to their parents. And there are 4 questions that test their understanding of commands. So they know their own name, respond to no and stop, respond to praise, can follow some commands. There are 4 questions on the modifier phenotype that require prefrontal modification. Understand some simple modifiers. For example, green apple versus red apple, big apple versus small apple. Understand several modifiers in a sentence. For example, small green apple. Understand size superlatives. Can select the largest, smallest object. This is verbatim, right? This is exactly as questions were posed to parents. And then there are 7 questions that ask parents about understanding of syntactic phenotype, understands possessive pronouns, spatial prepositions. So why spatial prepositions, right? Put the apple on top of the box versus inside the box versus behind the box. Because here you are combining 2 objects, the apple and the box, right? To successfully follow the instruction, you should be able to simulate in your mind using prefrontal synthesis. You should be able to have your lateral prefrontal cortex to synchronize the neural ensemble of the apple with neural ensemble of the box with the context of the spatial preposition to be able to understand what goes on top, inside, behind. And only after you mentally simulate this with prefrontal synthesis, then you can enact this action with the real objects. So that's why this sentence requires prefrontal synthesis and goes into syntactic phenotype. And notice that I'm using 2 different jargons. I'm using the cognitive neuroscience jargon, prefrontal synthesis, and the linguistic jargon, syntactic phenotype, all right? I hope that doesn't bother you. And the rest of the sentence structures, they also require prefrontal synthesis to understand. Things like fairy tales, they always talk about novel events, right? They talk about new objects like mermaid and cyclops, and they require prefrontal synthesis to enact the story in front of the mind's eye so that you understand what is going on, all right? So we gave them these 15 questions, and we asked whether the child can do this or cannot do. And the participants were individuals from the age 4 to age 22. We analyzed in one study 55,000 participants. The paper you've seen analyzed almost 18,000 participants. These are participants with normal speech. So we separated participants with normal speech so that speech doesn't confuse anything. These are the participants who can speak a sentence of 4 words. They still have a problem with language understanding. So what we've done with the data, we run clustering analysis. Clustering analysis is a very simple concept. Clustering analysis allows you to see which abilities or which items co-occur. So if 2 items occur together in one person always, and if they don't, if these abilities are, if the person is unable to do this, both of these abilities will disappear simultaneously. So if they appear simultaneously and disappear simultaneously, then the clustering technique will put them together. And what you see here, that the all modifier mechanism abilities are together, the command mechanism together, and the syntactic mechanism together. So we made a prediction, and we see exactly that these abilities co-occur. What does that mean? That means that all the command mechanisms are mediated by one mechanism, and the modifier abilities are mediated by another mechanism, and the syntactic abilities are mediated by the third mechanism. This is unsupervised hierarchical clustering analysis. Unsupervised because we don't do anything. We don't give the model any ideas. We just ask the model to do analysis by itself. It's completely data-driven, unsupervised. And you can see 3 very clear clusters. You can also do principal component analysis. And the principal component analysis also separated these 3 clusters into different corners, which also suggests that this syntactic mechanism abilities co-occur, separately this modifier mechanisms co-occur, and separately command mechanism co-occur together, and they don't co-occur between the groups. So this is data from 55,000 participants, and you can see exactly the same results. 3 clusters on the unsupervised hierarchical clustering, 3 clusters on the principal component analysis. So we are very comfortable that these are 3 different mechanisms. All right, so again, in some model individuals, genes regress to the ancestral functionality, causing underdevelopment of the arcuate fasciculus, and we are actually seeing these individuals. We can talk to there are tens of thousands of individuals with modifier phenotype. There are tens of thousands of individuals in our cohort with command phenotype. The command phenotype, according to this cognitive model, is are the individuals whose arcuate fasciculus is weak and short. They cannot control the neural ensembles in the posterior cortex. The best they can do, they can match a word to the object. They can do that, and that enables their control phenotype, control abilities. The modifier phenotype includes the individuals whose arcuate fasciculus can control the ventral path, the ventral stream, so they can imagine their car in blue, red, or green, or yellow, but they cannot combine 2 objects. They don't have prefrontal synthesis. So the best they can do is to use prefrontal modification. And so their best language phenotype is modified phenotype. And finally, syntactic phenotype is what you guys have. Your prefrontal cortex can perfectly control the spatial relationship between objects in your posterior cortex, and therefore you can imagine anything anywhere. You can understand stories, you can understand spatial prepositions, and so on and so forth. So you have prefrontal synthesis. So what are the difference between the groups? Again, you give the sentence, the cat carries the sheep. You understand this sentence because you can imagine the cat that carries the sheep. This is the way that most people, 99.2% people, understand what is going on, who carries who. Because you are able to synchronize these neurons in the parietal cortex and in the dorsal stream. People with command and modifier phenotypes, they don't understand who carries who. They understand there is the cat, there is the sheep, but they don't know who carries who. All right, you give a sentence. Give me the short blue pencil. A person with a modifier phenotype or syntactic phenotype, they have prefrontal modification. They can, remember, they recall the pencil, color this pencil with blue, and then imbue this pencil with a small size. So you have the small, short blue pencil, and they can find the small blue pencil out of many different straws, pencils, Legos, and so on. People who have command phenotype, they understand the blue, they understand the short, they understand the pencil, but they cannot combine this together. So in the clinical psychology, the name for this phenomenon is there are several names, but one is tunnel vision. So person is focusing on blue, and if you ask this person to give you the blue short pencil, and there are also blue straws and blue Legos, the person with the command phenotype has equal probability of giving you blue pencil and blue Lego and blue napkin and blue pencil and blue straw and so on, something blue. Or they can focus on the pencil and give you pencil of any color and any size. Again, these people can have multiple disorders, right? They can have Down syndrome, they can have autism, they can have other disorders. All right, is it clear so far? Very good. All right, this is slightly more difficult presentation of the same data, the dendrograms that you've seen, the command mechanism, modifier mechanism, syntactic mechanism is on your right vertically. And so each line is telling you these whether the parents answer this question with a yes, which is blue, or no, which is red, or sometimes with a white. So 3 types of parent answers. On the horizontal line, these are 17,000 patients, participants. So every participant, well, there are 17,000, so the lines are very, very thin. But you can see all participants, and the participants were clustered. And notice that the participants were again clusters into 3 clusters. And each cluster of participants correspond to our phenotype that we predicted. The syntactic phenotype, they have blue everywhere. So they understand everything. They comprehend all of these things that we asked parents. The command phenotype, they only comprehend the green stuff. So they have only blue color. Blue color means, again, yes. my child comprehends this. They only comprehend command mechanism abilities. Respond to praise, some commands, know and stop, knows their name. These individuals don't understand anything in modifier mechanism abilities and syntactic abilities. So all of these are either red, meaning they don't, or they're kind of white, meaning sometimes. And these individuals in the modifier phenotype, they understand both the command abilities they have and the modifier abilities they have. They have blue here, and they have red and white for the syntactic abilities. So they don't understand spatial prepositions, possessive pronouns, complex explanations, flexible syntax. Flexible syntax is the cow carries horse versus the horse carries cow. The verb tenses, the elaborate fairy tales, simple stories, they don't understand. And we have exactly the same cluster and diaphragm for analysis of 55,000 patients. So again, the syntactic phenotype understands everything, and the command doesn't understand modifier abilities and the syntactic sentence structures. And in the middle, there is modifier language phenotype. So these are individuals who were not able to acquire the modifier and the syntactic phenotype. They have their problem is congenital. They are born with a recessive mutation that does not enable them to understand syntactic language and modifier language. And these are individuals who are not able to understand syntactic language, but able to understand modifier language. But you guys, you now understand syntactic language, but you can lose syntactic language if you have a stroke or other damage to either your prefrontal cortex or arcuate fasciculus, also called occipital parietal temporal junction right there. Adults who understand syntactic language, who are smart people, can deteriorate quickly as a result of a stroke or dementia or some kind of bad virus that eats up your arcuate fasciculus. These are the three places you don't want virus to attack you. Children, typical children. We created a test for language phenotype, and we administered that to typical children, 116 typical children, and we see exactly 3 language phenotypes. 50% of typical children acquire the command phenotype by 1.5, so 50% of children. By 1.5 years of age, 50% of them acquire command phenotype. And all of them acquire command phenotype by 2. The modifier phenotype, 50% of children acquire the modifier phenotype by the age of 3 years. And all of the children acquire the modifier phenotype by 4. The syntactic phenotype, 50% of children acquire by 4 years, and all of the children at 5, 100% of children at 5 or older in our population acquired syntactic phenotype. Now let me ask you a question. Have you seen children or adults with the command phenotype in your life? Good. So you may not have seen, even if you haven't seen adults. Adults are they're often institutionalized. even if you haven't met anybody with autism, Down syndrome who have command or modifier phenotype, you definitely seen small children who have the modifier phenotype at the age of 3 and who have the command phenotype at the age of 2. At the age of 3, children will easily give you the small red pencil, the large blue straw, but they don't understand the story. So if you try to read them Pinocchio, they don't have a clue what was going on. They don't understand it yet. That's the modifier phenotype. All right, guys, why am I telling you all of that? I'm telling you all of that because we are going to language phenotypes that were developing during evolution. And during evolution, the language phenotypes went through exactly same 3 stages that all of you went through in your childhood. When you were born, your arcuate fasciculus was short and weak. When you reached 3 years of age, your arcuate fasciculus was myelinated enough so that you can imagine your car in yellow, blue, green, and so on. And when you reached 4 years of age, your arcuate fasciculus grew enough for you to be able to understand stories. Now, during the evolution, we are observing the same story, and we can, using our neurological model, we can connect, we can date the archaeological artifacts that you guys find because you go on field trips and you dig and you find beautiful artifacts that nobody else can find. From my office, I cannot find artifacts that you can find because you can go on field trips. So what kinds of things you find that are unambiguously are telling that the person acquired prefrontal synthesis. Now, the person acquired prefrontal synthesis when they can imagine novel things, novel hybrid things in their mind. So, for example, this is a hybrid object. It has the head of the lion and the body of a man. It was built by a modern human 39,000 years ago. This is from Swabian Alps. If you ever travel to the city of Ulm in the Swabian Alps in Germany, they have a small museum where you can actually see this object. It's about that big. You can see the original, it's still there. It's the hometown of Einstein. This town has a beautiful cathedral as well. Anyway, this is the lineman. This is the object from Dordogne region in France. If you never travel to Dordogne, it's a must. You can go to Lascaux caves. You can travel the Dordogne River. They have beautiful castle. They have excellent food like foie gras and so on. If you've never been there, that's definitely should be on top of your list. And you can visit some of the caves. Well, definitely you can visit Dordogne. They have an excellent copy of Dordogne cave. They don't let you go to the original, but you can go to one-to-one copy. Huge cave, it blows your mind. Another thing that definitely tells us about the prefrontal synthesis are needles with an eye. Well, bone needles are used to stitch in clothing. To cut and stitch an animal hide into a well-fitting garment, one needs first to mentally simulate the process. That is, imagine how the parts can be combined into a finished product that fits the body. Such mental simulation is impossible without the prefrontal synthesis. The first needles with an eye appear around 60,000 years ago, and they are unambiguously telling us that these individuals have prefrontal synthesis. Constructions of dwellings, because these have to be stimulated in the mind first. religious beliefs. Religious beliefs are an excellent marker for prefrontal synthesis because it is impossible to think about God that doesn't exist, that you can see, that you cannot see without prefrontal synthesis. You have to imagine the God. You have to imagine the afterlife. The only way to imagine afterlife is to have prefrontal synthesis. So this is an excellent marker of prefrontal synthesis. And this is the burial from Russia from 28,000 years ago. And you can see, this is the artist presentation of this body. So this person was buried with all kinds of bracelets and necklaces and pendants and tunic, and they were thinking about the afterlife. There is no doubt about it. They were thinking about their afterlife. So again, these burials appear in the archaeological record around 60,000 years ago. So we can many different types of archaeological artifacts. The new tools, these hybrid art objects, the bow and arrow, the burials, all of them appear around 65,000 years ago, and they appear in multiple geographical locations simultaneously. What does it tell you? To me, it tells that there is a single origin of prefrontal synthesis, and then the carriers of prefrontal synthesis are spreading around the globe. And what do we have around 65,000 years ago? We have the biggest migration of modern humans from Africa into Eurasia and Australia. This is happening 65,000 years ago exactly. These are the carriers of the prefrontal synthesis, no doubt about it. This is not me. These are good genetic data. The only thing I'm saying is that these people are carrying in them the genes that allow them to attain prefrontal synthesis and the syntactic phenotype. There is absolutely no artifacts in the archaeological record that would demonstrate prefrontal synthesis before 70,000 years ago. And there are plenty of artifacts after 65,000 years ago. To me, it's a very good indication that the prefrontal synthesis and the syntactic phenotype were acquired together 70,000 years ago. So this is the syntactic phenotype that children acquired 4 years of age. Our ancestors acquired 70,000 years ago, very recently. All right, what about the modified phenotype? What kinds of artifacts are telling us that hominins were able to modify a single object in size and shape? Can you tell me? Well, is there a microphone? Can I hear you guys?
Hey, can you hear us if we talk? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, so I should be able to hear everyone. So guys, what kind of a big change in human behavior tells you that humans can modify a single object? Well, it's clearly mode to hand axes, right? These are the stone tools that cannot be produced by just percussing one stone against another stone. This is something that people imagined in their mind. This is an excellent indication of the prefrontal modification mechanism. They have the template, the mental template of this object in their mind, and then they make this object in real life. So when do the mode 2 Acheulean stone tools appear? Around 2 million years ago. Well, that means that the modified phenotype was acquired 2 million years ago. So the modified phenotype that allows small children, 3-year-old children, to give you a small green pencil, that is the phenotype that was acquired about 2 million years ago. And what else was going on 2 million years ago? 2 million years ago is when the speech emerges. So speech and the modified phenotype emerge simultaneously. And what happens with the brain size? The brain size until 2 million years ago doesn't really change much, if at all. But 2 million years ago, the brain size increases quite dramatically. It doubles. What else is going on 2 million years ago? Homo erectus. Homo erectus appears 2 million years ago, around 2 million years ago, and Homo erectus is a very different species, very different compared to all other species that lived before Homo erectus. So Homo erectus is almost our height. Homo erectus is very inquisitive species. Homo erectus traveled to Eurasia. We find Homo erectus in Spain, in Indonesia. So Homo erectus is very inquisitive. All right. Well, another question. Can animals acquire the modifier phenotype? So that you can answer. Yeah, raise your finger up if you think that animals can acquire the modifier phenotype, and your finger down like that if they cannot acquire the modifier phenotype. What do you think? So some people raising finger up, some people raising finger down. Well, animals can learn adjectives. So animals can learn color and numbers, but no animal was able to give you the small green apple or the big yellow straw. No animal ever was demonstrated to acquire modified phenotype. Modified phenotype seems to be uniquely human trait. In animals and chimpanzees and bonobos, the arcuate fasciculus is weak and short. It doesn't reach the ventral stream, the posterior cortex. And as a result, they probably cannot acquire the modified phenotype. Again, in their posterior cortex, the connections are good. So if you give the word to the posterior cortex, give me red, the chimpanzee trained to understand red can give you red, as well as some dogs and cats. Some of them are very smart. They can give you something red, but they cannot combine an adjective and a noun. This is what the modifier phenotype is about. It's all about combination of the noun and adjective. Animals cannot do it. That's a uniquely human phenotype. What else should we tell about the modifier phenotype? Well, modifier phenotype was not envisioned by the linguistics. So there are no terms in linguistics that will describe a modified phenotype. Things like compositionality, grammar, merge, all of these terms can be applied to both syntactic and modified phenotype. I don't know why, but for some reason, linguistics never looked at this very simple cognitive model, and as a result, they don't have a term. And if you don't have a term, this thing doesn't exist for you. So linguists are behaving as though these things don't exist. They think that the modifier and syntactic is the same thing. It's not the same thing. These are two different things. Neurologically, these are very, very different structure of the brain. These are very different people. If we have linguists in the audience, please, please, please tell other linguists that modifier is very different from syntactic phenotype. Well, here's another question for you. What are the evolutionary benefits of the modifier communication system that Homo erectus acquired 2 million years ago? Were there any communication benefits The answer is yes. They could communicate job assignments, like give me a bigger stone, give me a smaller stick, give me the biggest stone. They could be providing some spatial directions. Collect flintstones near the smaller hill. This is not a syntactic sentence by the measure of the cognitive neuroscience model. The only thing that the listener should be able to understand is the smaller hill. The smaller hill is the Flintstones. So the smaller hill is the modifier. Phenotype should be able to understand it. And the Flintstone near the smaller hill, this is command language that people with the command phenotype can understand. Colors. Pick up the black berries only. Do not pick up the green berries. This you can tell the 3-year-old person because they have the modifier phenotype. Some 3-year-olds understand numbers, although usually numbers are later on addition. But when you have the modifier phenotype, you somehow can understand numbers because numbers is another modifier. So you can say, and there's Homo erectus 2 million years ago. Well, I'm not sure about 2 million years ago, but Neanderthals 500,000 years ago, 500,000 years ago, they should have been they should be able to say and understand. The cave is 7 feet wide. Neanderthals must have understand the numerals. Can give me 7 stones. Now, again, animals, some chimpanzees have been trained to understand 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. They understand Arabic numbers, but they cannot bring you 7 stones versus 7 pencils versus 7 balls. They don't combine the modifiers and the nouns. No animal can do that. People with the modifier phenotype, they can combine the numbers with the objects. So Rolf and others demonstrated that Neanderthals possessed an oral communication system. Were they capable of storytelling? Thumb up, yes. Thumb down, no. I agree with you. They were not capable of storytelling. Storytelling requires not only the ability to speak, but also the ability to grasp complex narratives. Storytelling requires the syntactic phenotype. Archaeological evidence suggests that Neanderthals had the modifier phenotype. They never acquired the syntactic phenotype. They never left a single artifact that would unambiguously inform us that they acquired prefrontal synthesis. They did not acquire prefrontal synthesis, therefore they had modifier phenotype. And people were dreaming about talking to Neanderthals. Some geneticists actually want to resurrect Neanderthals. You don't need to resurrect Neanderthal in order to talk to one. Just find a 3-year-old child or find a person with the adult with a modified phenotype, and you can talk as much as you want to these people. I talked to hundreds of these people, adults with modified phenotype. They talk normally, they look normal, they look like you. Unless you give them specific task, unless you ask them, show me the picture, the cat carries the dog, show me the picture, the horse rides the sheep. Unless you ask these pictures, you think they have normal developed mind. But when you ask these questions, you realize that they have no clue who carries who. They have no clue. When you ask them to put the glass on the table, under the table, behind the table, they have no clue. So what are the benefits of syntactic phenotype? What do you think, guys? The benefits of syntactic phenotype, the main benefits. And yes, the communication is better, religion increases the social cohesion, and you can prototype new tools in your mind. You can think of a bow and arrows, you can think of spear thrower, you can think of, I don't know, you can develop a spaceship. What is the main benefit? The main benefit in my mind is that the prefrontal synthesis allows you to conduct mental simulation of strategy. You have this stratagem. It's like having a fast computer. So let me give you an example. Both modern humans and Neanderthals hunted large animals such as mammoth. How would you go about killing a mammoth? Mammoth is good for you, right? It can feed your family for a month. How would you go about killing a mammoth? Now, this one, you have to cry the answer. Tell me, how would you go killing a mammoth?
Make a plan.
Rolf, can you say it to me so I can hear it?
Said you have to make a plan.
Yeah, which plan? Exactly. Tell me about your plan.
Mhm.
Was the answer, Rolf? Can you please repeat it?
Started off a cliff.
You could make it run off a cliff, for example.
Yeah, that's a good plan. What else?
You could have a whole lot of people attacking the mammoth at once.
And this is exactly how Neanderthals were attacking them, with a whole lot of people trying to puncture them at the same time. You guys are not Neanderthals. This is a very dangerous way of killing a mammoth, because the mammoth would try to step on you. And as a result, Neanderthals had a lot of broken bones that healed. Neanderthals really had really hard time killing mammoths. You are humans. Tell me the best way to kill a mammoth. Moving
Attacking
on.
it from a distance with weapons.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Unfortunately, mammoth is very difficult to kill from a distance. You will need thousands of arrows to kill a mammoth.
Right. Okay, someone else said to make a trap.
Yeah, making a trap. Here you go. So you can make a trap. You can push the animal there, and then this is your McDonald's. You can come at any moment, cut a piece of meat, and eat your meal. These are modern humans. This is the most successful revolutionary way of getting food. Once humans acquire prefrontal synthesis, they can now trap animals. They have huge amount of food. They can think of different type of traps. This is from Natural Museum of History in New York. This is the trap. The animal steps inside, and then these sharp things puncture the leg. So they come up with many, many, many different traps, and as a result, they us. These are not they anymore. These are us, modern humans. They become really successful, and our numbers become multiple, and we very quickly spread out of Africa into all Eurasia, into Australia, and then into Americas. We are definitely the most successful species, and our success is being able to kill large animals. Of course, we quickly killed all large animals, and then we started agriculture, which was successful as well. All right, guys, this is almost all. I will quickly take you into several things, additional things that are less important. But we can do that, and I think it is exciting, and I thought that you would be excited as well. So one of the things is that we can test traits, which traits are closely related to language phenotypes, right? So for example, hyperactivity. Do you think hyperactivity is related to any language phenotype? Thumb up, yes. Thumb down, no. And most of you are right. Hyperactivity is absolutely unrelated to any language phenotype, right? People with any language phenotype can be hyperactive or hypoactive, right? And if you cluster hyperactivity with all the language abilities, hyperactive is clustered into separate cluster at far distance at the language clusters. So hyperactivity has nothing to it, doesn't co-occur with any of the language abilities. It's a completely separate thing. It is independent of language. All right? All right, the next one, bedwetting. Do you think bedwetting is associated with any language phenotypes? Thumb up, yes. Thumb down, no.
Most are saying no.
Good. And you're right, bedwetting is clustered into different clusters. People with any clusters can be subject to bedwetting. I don't know. Some adults are doing bedwetting, as far as I know. So you can have command item, command phenotype, or you can have syntactic phenotype. You still can wet the bed. All right. What about demand sameness? So some people demand that everything happens always the same way as yesterday. Is it related to any language phenotype? Thumb up, yes. Thumb down, no. And you're right, it is different cluster, so it is not related. What about representational drawing? Is representational drawing related to any language phenotype? Thumb up, yes. Thumb down, no.
Mostly thumbs up here.
You're right. Draws representation. We asked this question. First of all, we did the following study, right? We only took the participants who are already drawing, coloring, and doing art. There are 14,000 of them. And then we asked which phenotype the drawing representationally coincide with. And it is strongly within the syntactic mechanism. So it must be sharing some neurological mechanism with the syntactic language mechanism. And it kind of makes sense, right? Because if you're going to draw a scene on the on paper somewhere, right? You want to imagine that in front of your mind's eye first, right? So you need prefrontal synthesis for that, and you need prefrontal synthesis to understand fairy tales. And this is the same is true for drawing per description. Drawing per description, for example, my child can draw a three-headed horse. Again, it co-clusters with the syntactic language phenotype. This is, by the way, the drawing of a person with modifier phenotype. So this person has modifier phenotype. He was trained to draw a cat. I mean, you can train anything in person, right? He doesn't need to imagine. He draws. He can draw it with the eyes closed. But this is different because I asked him to draw a cat and then show me the three-headed cat. And he drew the second head and counted with his fingers. 1, 2, and then he drew the third head and was speaking aloud, 1, 2, 3, and then he gave me the piece of paper saying, oh, here you go, this is three-headed cat. So So I mean, initially I wouldn't think they could do it, people with the modifier phenotype, but eventually a number of people convinced me that people with modifier phenotype can draw multi-headed animal. Also, we have autistic savants with the command phenotype, some of whom can draw, but very few of them, very few people can. And they probably use a different mechanism. They probably don't imagine anything, they do it on paper. So if you have any other ideas, we can add your email me, and we can discuss which traits. We can basically test which traits belong to which phenotype, right? So if you can think of a trait, if you can think of a way to ask this question to a parent, we can run a large-scale study, and we can test whether people with different phenotypes have this trait or don't have this trait. All right, we can also cluster together expressive language with language mechanisms. And if we do that, this is the expressive language, and these are the clusters of language comprehension. They don't coincide, so we would think that expressive language mechanisms are different from the receptive language mechanism. All right, so this is the last slide. What were the big questions that we asked in the beginning? Why chimps and bonobos couldn't learn could learn hundreds of words? Why couldn't they acquire full language? Well, chimps do not acquire modified phenotype. Their arcuate fasciculus never grows to innervate the ventral stream, so they can only have command phenotype. Stasis and stone tools. Why couldn't hominins manufacture more two stone tools earlier? Well, to manufacture more two stone tools, you need your arcuate fasciculus being in control of your posterior cortex, ventral stream. Until it is, you cannot manufacture more two stone tools. There was long interval between modern speech development and modern cognitive abilities. So Neanderthals could speak. Why didn't they have cognitive abilities similar to modern humans? Well, Neanderthals had modified phenotype, but their arcuate fasciculus didn't grow toward the dorsal stream, and as a result, they couldn't synchronize two different objects. They didn't have prefrontal synthesis, they didn't have syntactic phenotype, and as a result, they didn't have the cognitive abilities of humans. So this is the last slide, trust me. Our result reconcile the gradualist and the saltationist hypothesis. Believe it or not, both gradualists are right and saltationists are right. They have been arguing for at least 30 years, and they cannot agree with each other. But our model shows that both of them are right. The model of gradualists saying that language evolves slowly over 2 million years, yes. The modifier phenotype evolved slowly for the last 2 million years together with the speech. And saltationists like Noam Chomsky, they say that modern language evolved just 100,000 years ago. And yes, he is right as well. The syntactic language, which is the modern language, only appeared 70,000 years ago. So with this, I will finish, and I should say thank you to a number of people who participated in this research. These are all volunteers. And I should say thank you to hundreds of thousands of people who gave us the data. Some of them gave us longitudinal data. This has been a very, very long-running study. Thank you to them. And if you have any questions, I'm all yours.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Okay, thank you, Dr. Vyshedskiy. That was very interesting. We did have one question from the chat that I just saw pop up. Do you think animals can, with enough time, evolve the ability for the modifier phenotype and then the third phenotype with more time?
Yes, but in that case, they wouldn't be animals, right? They would be humans.
That's right. There was an animal that did that.
Exactly. Yes, with enough time, anybody can do anything. You just need 2 million years of very tough selection, and you will get another human species.
Hmm. Okay.
And,
Do
well,
we
you
have
need to start.
anyone?
You need to
Yeah,
start with Homo erectus, of course, right? If you want to start with a chimpanzee, you need more time.
right. They're asking, like, what about dolphins, for example? Could they?
Right, right. The question is much deeper, actually. The question is basically what is so unique about humans? Why is it humans on this planet that became the top species that became intelligent, and no other animal is even close to us in their intelligence? And this is a very deep question, and they have an answer. And I described the answer 20 years ago in the first book that I published. I never wrote scientific articles on that because it's very difficult to get empirical data. But basically, in my mind, this happened because of vision. It is the visual system that was improving and driving human evolution. And let me show maybe a few slides that I have that talk about that. The primary driver of language. Of course, the speech is important and the stone tools important, socialization important, but it is the visual improvement that is the most important. So why do I think that? Well, let us go back 6 million years ago and think of Australopithecines who had to go around in savannas looking for food. They couldn't afford staying in one place because the food was scarce. They had to, the chimpanzees are comfortable and content in their treetops, but not Australopithecines. These guys had to walk. That's why their the bottom part of their body quickly evolved to be human-like. So they had to walk in savannas. But think about these savannas. There are plenty of predators. There are big cats, there are saber-tooths, there are hyenas, and Australopithecines are just 4 feet tall, and they cannot run away from these big animals. These big cats are much faster. So what is the only way that our ancestors, Australopithecines, were able to, how were they able to deal with these animals? They cannot fight. So the only way for them to save themselves from death, from imminent death, is to identify the big cat from far away and throw stones or sticks into the big cat. Because if you throw stones or sticks into the big cat would walk away. These big cats, they prefer an unexpected attack. If they see that you see them, they walk away. And you have to do it from 50 meters, from 50 yards. If you're able to see the big cat that is in front of you, let's say that is between you and the water place, water hole, where you want to drink, you have to throw the stones into it and it will walk away, and you can walk further on. So the only sense that gives you the ability to see a big cat from far away is the sense of vision. You cannot smell it, you cannot hear it. These are very quiet animals. And well, we can actually watch a video This is the video of modern chimps dealing with the leopard. And if chimps can throw sticks into a leopard, then the standard operating procedure for our ancestors will be the same.
Mechanical leopard was instrumental in an experiment with chimpanzees conducted by scientists from the University of Amsterdam. Anthropologists have long puzzled over how our ancestors defended themselves against predators. How could such small creatures, not yet intelligent enough to make stone weapons, have possibly survived? Leopards are natural predators of chimpanzees. Here's the chimp's attack. We catch a glimpse of how our ancestors, having left the safety of the trees, may have first met the challenges of life on the ground.
So anyway, this is if chimpanzees can do that, that means that our ancestors were also probably able to throw stones. But the biggest challenge is to identify these camouflaged, stationary, hidden animals from a distance. Sometimes you only see an ear. Sometimes you would only see the grass that is behaving differently from the rest of the grass. So you have to be able to integrate over large distances. You have to be able to see small details. Now, all of this visual processing is conducted by the prefrontal cortex. Now, they don't teach this in the neuroscience classes, but the prefrontal cortex role in processing visual information is immense. This is the prefrontal cortex that is combining and recombining different pieces of information together for you to perceive the correct image. The posterior cortex by itself is very dumb. It is very straightforward. It is not clever. The cleverness comes from the prefrontal cortex. So in my mind, the whole predation force was killing anybody who was not able to see a big cat from far away. As you know, evolution is progressing one coffin at a time. These coffins were generated by big cats who were eating anybody and everybody who did not detect them from 50 meters away.
Okay, thank you. Let's ask another question in the audience here. Someone have a question based on the reading or the lecture today? Yes, over here. Just tell me and I'll repeat it for him, yes.
In the reading, there was like stuff about a potential and I was wondering, like, in the future, like the current gene editing technologies we have, could you potentially take an adult with a modifier phenotype and make them like have a syntax phenotype by editing genes?
She's asking about kind of the relationship between our genome and our language abilities, and whether in the future with fancy gene editing, et cetera, could he take someone who has a modifier phenotype and give them the syntactic phenotype?
Excellent question. That's exactly the next frontier where we're trying to move. We're trying to write a grant for a study of relationship between genotype and language phenotype. We'd like to know the genes that are causing these problems. And once we know the genes, maybe we can have a genetic intervention to modify the genes. Another possible intervention would be to extend the critical period. So the biggest problem with this arcuate fasciculus not being able to grow long enough is the duration of the critical period. Critical period is shorter in individuals with arcuate fasciculus that is underdeveloped. So there must be some pharmaceuticals that extend the critical period. I'd love to try those pharmaceuticals in children, in clinical trials of children. So that's another way forward. And still another way forward is interventions with language therapy. This is the current state of the art. People are administered language therapies, autistic children, children with Down syndrome. The government provides, in most cases, a therapist who would have classes of language therapy. The problem is that the waiting period is usually years, months at best, years. And in the results that we see, that's a different study, but I think the preprint is available online. In the results that we see, these individuals have much shorter critical period. And so you have to administer language therapy much faster. You have to start working with these children as soon as you see first symptoms of the problem. And in modern day world where the diagnosis is the trigger for the therapy, children don't receive this therapy as fast as necessary, because diagnosis, well, try getting an appointment with the doctor. It takes you 6 months nowadays, right? So the diagnosis with clinical pathologist or clinical person will take you months, if not years, and then there is another 6 months to a year waiting for the therapist. Boom! By that time, you lost the ability to modify anything.
Right. Okay. Let's have another question. Yes.
So in the lecture, you mentioned that the trauma can cause regression to the arcuate fasciculus. Sorry. And I was wondering if age, like as the human ages, does that also cause regression?
Does human aging cause some kind of regression in the arcuate fasciculus, like trauma might do in a kind of physical injury? Just the aging process, does that affect it?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question. The frontotemporal dementia is the one that breaks the connections between, at least this is the one type. I'm sure there are other types of dementia that breaks the connections between the front and the back. Any type of dementia where you break this connection, especially if this occurs in the left hemisphere, might result in degradation of the syntactic phenotype. Now, one thing you should remember is that a lot of language processing is automated or routinized in typical adults. So many typical adults, and I did a small study on aphantasia. People with aphantasia, they don't imagine anything. They just learned to process certain syntactic structures. They know the answer. It's basically exactly like the ChatGPT large language models. They learned the structure of a sentence, and they don't need to imagine anything. They don't need prefrontal synthesis. Prefrontal synthesis is a lot of work. Whenever you are using your lateral prefrontal cortex to modify things in the back of your brain, you're using a lot of energy. This is expensive. Most people don't like that. So the way we deal with that, a lot of us routinize language. We're all routinized language. In most of your conversations at home, you never use prefrontal synthesis. You don't need syntactic phenotype. You could very well have command phenotype and do what your wife tells you. It actually could be more successful marriage. You just do what she tells you, and And this is it. You only use prefrontal synthesis and syntactic phenotype when you go to lectures, when you go to universities, and when you try to listen to books. But nowadays we have TV, so we don't need to listen to books. Again, when you watch television, you don't need syntactic phenotype. You don't need to imagine anything. Anything is imagined for you. So, for example, television is absolutely dangerous proposition to children who are trying to learn syntactic language. TV is killing that. And if somebody has short critical period and you put that person in front of TV, well, you just made somebody into intellectually disabled person for lifetime. This cannot be changed after 4 or 5 years, unfortunately.
Okay.
So this is a long answer to the question.
Okay. Maybe just a quick follow-up question on the earlier one about maybe animals developing more language abilities. And of course, we've studied chimpanzees and gorillas, and they can use signs with the lexicograms, et cetera. And of course, one of the biggest kind of fascinating unknown questions out there is whale and dolphin communication. What are they talking about? What is the signal? Is it language? And I'm just wondering if, because we don't know through the ways we've been able to study so far, do we know anything about their prefrontal fasciculus? Do they have an extensive one? Have people studied their neuroanatomy? And would that be a way to infer these real human-like language abilities in an animal?
That's an excellent study, Rolf. I think you should write it up and send it to
Let's get a scalpel first.
Nobody, to my understanding, have ever tried to follow connections between the frontal part of the brain and the posterior brain. All mammals are able to think of an object because they have 5-layered neocortex. All mammals have dreams, except for monotremes, one of a few animals. So animals can dream about the future in their sleep, right? Your dog, dolphins, whales, they can imagine future, but this process is spontaneous. It's not controlled by their frontal cortex. So I don't know. The experiments for tracing arcuate fasciculus are straightforward. You inject a marker into the front, and you watch the marker go into the back, and then you do slices and look at the marker, or you can inject the marker into the back and look for the fibers that go forward. So the technology is there. It's a matter of finding a dolphin and injecting the marker.
Okay, good. Yeah. Okay. Let's have another question from the audience here. Yes. Yes.
I was wondering, in a lot of birds, we're seeing them be like being able to identify objects. If you can say to like a parrot, pick the red bowl, and there's a red bowl and a blue bowl, and they'll pick the red one. What differentiates that from the modifier phenotype that makes up the command phenotype? Because you said that like animals can't do modifier.
She's saying she gave an example of a parrot recognizing the red bowl versus the green bowl, and that would seem to be part of the modifier phenotype, not just the command phenotype. So what's the difference? What is the question exactly?
Like, what makes like humans applying modifiers different from like an animal applying a modifier in that case? Like what makes our ability to do that separate from theirs?
What makes our ability to have a modifier phenotype separate from animals' abilities? No?
Right. I understand the question. So animals can match red with the color red because that process is confined to the posterior cortex. The sound is produced here. The Wernicke's area is right there. The Wernicke's area is associated area. It associates the sound of the word red with the red color that is encoded here. It's all together in the posterior cortex. You don't need your frontal cortex at all. Humans can imagine red ball, red pen, blue car, and blue sky, and green grass, and green eyeglasses, and so on and so forth. So animals, when you ask animals to give you a red ball, if there are only balls, so if you only have balls on the table, green, blue, yellow balls, the animal will give you red ball. The problem is when you put other red objects on the table next to the ball, if you also have red cup, red t-shirt, red pencil, then the animal will give you something red. But not the animals lack the ability to combine the modifier and the object. They lack the ability to imagine red, something that they have not seen ever red. So I can imagine my computer in red, and no animal can do that.
Right. Okay. All right. Good. Yeah. Let's have another question. Yes, over there. Does the prefrontal prefrontal cortex, no, synthesis, also play a role in spontaneous imaginations, involuntary imagination?
No, completely two different processes. But unfortunately, a lot of people confuse them. And again, let me show you a slide that I put together to illustrate that. And this is the slide. So think about your recent nightmare, right? We all have nightmares. Everybody have dreams. 4 hours a night, we are looking at the dreams. We just remember last 1 minute of last one dream. So you remember a nightmare. Your nightmare was generated completely involuntarily. Now, you can imagine absolutely the same thing that you've seen in your nightmare voluntarily. And we actually have a single word to describe this. We call this imagination, we call that imagination. But these two processes are very different. The difference is analogical to the difference between muscle spasm and the voluntary movement of muscles. When you have a muscle spasm, is there anything voluntary about muscle spasm? No, you have spastic muscles, you have pain in your leg, and you can only think about how to get rid of this spasm, and you cannot because it is involuntary. The nightmare is also involuntary. Both of them are involuntary because there is no role for the frontal cortex. To move muscles voluntarily, you move them with the frontal cortex. In fact, everything voluntary that you can do comes from the frontal cortex. Everything involuntary that you do does not come from the frontal cortex, it comes from elsewhere.
Right. Okay.
So there is the same difference between the nightmares and voluntary imagination. Nightmares are involuntary, voluntary imagination are voluntary. So nightmares do not depend on the lateral prefrontal cortex. During REM sleep, the lateral prefrontal cortex is inactive. There are many, many papers that show that. No blood goes to lateral prefrontal cortex. If you lose the lateral prefrontal cortex, you still have the same nightmares because the lateral prefrontal cortex has nothing to do with the nightmares. Nightmares are confined to the posterior cortex. On the other hand, the intact lateral prefrontal cortex is absolutely essential for voluntary imagination, for prefrontal synthesis and the prefrontal modification. And if in people who lose their lateral prefrontal cortex or lose the arcuate fasciculus, both the prefrontal modification and prefrontal synthesis can be affected.
Okay, great. Did you have a?
I have a follow-up question. When I listen to someone telling a story, I very spontaneously imagine the story in my head. It's not really something I decide to do. So is that involving the prefrontal cortex?
Did you understand?
Excellent question. Yes, I heard the question. Well, it depends. It depends on the what you're talking about. I was watching my conversation with my wife, and most of them do not require any prefrontal synthesis. Where are you going? I'm going to a store. What do you need? I need potatoes. I need milk. All right, I buy milk. You don't need prefrontal synthesis here. It's all command language. But if you have a person, if you go to your therapist and you tell your therapist the stories about your childhood, now your therapist is probably using their prefrontal synthesis to understand what was happening to you in your childhood. If you are reading a novel, you must be using prefrontal synthesis to understand the novel. Now, you can have a little bit of fantasy, right? You sometimes would notice that you are not reading the novel, but you are fantasizing about, I don't know, being with those heroes in the novel. That fantasy is spontaneous. For that fantasy, you don't need prefrontal synthesis. So your dog could probably have a fantasy of eating something nice, and your cat could have a fantasy about visiting the other room. At the very least, they have these fantasies in their sleep. That has been shown in the experiment. Animals do fantasize about things that never happened to them, and it was measured experimentally, neurologically in their brain. So in most cases, it is a combination. You use a little bit of prefrontal synthesis, you use a little bit of fantasizing. The thing that I wasn't really talking about is that the prefrontal cortex can also limit your fantasy around certain areas that you can fantasize about. And I never spoke about the difference between right hemisphere and left hemisphere. They are actually thinking differently. It is the left hemisphere that uses prefrontal synthesis and the right hemisphere that is primarily fantasizing along the categories that prefrontal cortex is limiting the right hemisphere. I am teaching a very popular class at Boston University that you can audit. I'm teaching it 3 times a year, spring, fall, and the summer, and a lot of people are taking it and people are loving it. There is absolutely not possible for me to teach you neurology, neuroscience of imagination in 1 hour. But I think I'm able to do it in 18 hours, 18 lectures, 40 hours of the class, 3-hour lectures. So if you're interested in that class, you must come to Boston in the summer. There's very fast-paced class, 3 times a week, every week for 5 weeks. You don't need probably to stay for the last class, maybe last week, maybe 2 last weeks, but first 3 weeks are most intensive. It's usually very ineffective if you take it by Zoom. The sound is bad, the visuals are bad. You cannot ask questions. In class, we go over homeworks, and there are papers that we study. It's a very, very intensive class. You're all welcome to join and audit this class. I'm teaching it again this summer and probably the next summer. And until I die, here I go.
Okay, well, we have time for another question. Someone else who hasn't asked one yet. Yes.
So like, if you have like any sort of like ability, like physical or like damage to like, you know, like heavy jumping, would that like affect your ability to like with like prefrontal cortex, like in order to take two individual things in mind when you're getting to that, do you like lose that ability, like damage or like heavy jumping?
They're asking about whether heavy drug use might affect the kind of ability to maintain syntactic language. Maybe you would sort of revert back to a modifier phenotype a little bit. Is that the question?
Yes.
Yeah, nothing comes to my mind in terms of interaction between drugs and
Right.
prefrontal synthesis.
Okay.
The evidence on marijuana, because marijuana is often blamed that people feel stupid. The evidence is there is very different evidence. Some people get smarter, some people get dumber, and in some people the effect is temporary, in some people the effect is more permanent. So the data are very confusing.
Okay, great. Another question. Yeah, Max.
There were like two parts of this presentation that I questioned a little bit on the timeline of like cognitive ability based off of the artifacts, and also phenotype not only being modified by the vesiculus.
Mm-hmm.
I assume that the phenotypes are a culmination of smaller genetically modified neural changes, and that's why we see some differentiation in their testing ability, and also why we see that different neural disorders result in differing levels of syntactic ability, modifier ability, etc. So I just think that maybe there's definitely more to it. And would you think that there are other possible I guess reasons for other than the vesiculus that modulate the ability for like language acquisition?
He's asking whether there are other mechanisms or parts of the brain that might play a role here other than the arcuate fasciculus. Are we focusing too much on one part and there could be others? Is that more or
Yes,
less?
that's good.
Right. Well, if you were studying movement of hands and feet, you would focus on the motor cortex and the connections between the motor cortex and the skeletal muscles. If you are investigating the syntactic language, you must focus on the prefrontal cortex and the connections between the prefrontal cortex and the posterior cortex. The analogy stands: movement of muscles, movement of thoughts. These are very analogous processes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I had a question I was thinking about too. So a lot of times we hear one of the main distinctions of human language is that it's a symbolic form of communication, whereas other animal forms of communication are not symbolic. Maybe they're more kind of about their emotional state, or there could be some information content, but not referring to actual physical objects, sounds referring to objects in the environment. And then we know that chimps can actually do that a little bit if they're trained to, right? But I'm just wondering if you have a command phenotype, is there any symbolic element in that?
Right. You can have symbolic element in any phenotype. I am not a proponent of using the word symbolic because the term is extremely ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
symbolism to me means that people are thinking symbolic. No, they pierce their ear because this is the symbol of their status. They place a I don't know, some kind of rings on themselves that are telling others that
Right.
this is signature. I'm aristocracy. My relatives are coming 20 generations back.
Right.
So this is symbolic to me, but in my mind, chimpanzees are also symbolic, right? Chimpanzees have just slightly different symbols of their power, and alpha male would put a lot of symbols on himself to make sure that everybody knows that he is alpha male. I think the symbolic term used in linguistic is more more relevant to kind of ability of individuals to use prefrontal synthesis, right? Because the objects, the neural ensembles of these objects in the neocortex, these are the symbols in the end, right? And they and we are able to modify these objects that are symbols. So a lot of people are using the word symbolic, maybe to mean that we can manipulate symbols, meaning manipulate using prefrontal synthesis to manipulate objects in the posterior cortex. And then I would fully agree that this is something that humans acquired just recently, 70,000 years ago. Still others would
Right.
think that symbolic thinking is your ability to modify a single language. And I would again agree with them. This is symbolic, right? If you can make your car bigger, you can paint your car in your mind different colors, that's symbolic. So see how symbolic is very ambiguous, and I'm not really sure what
Right.
people are talking about when they say symbolic.
Okay.
So to me, using a very clear terminology that is based in neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience, is utmost important. Otherwise, you readers would not know what you're talking about.
Right. Okay, great. Susie, you had your hand up. You probably get the last question, so go ahead.
Oh, well, I'm actually asking it on behalf of one of our fellow Zoom guests.
Okay.
Coria asked, any thoughts on how honeybees achieve their dance language? They have no cortex, as best I know.
Yeah, definitely. Honeybees, the Nobel Prize for understanding their communication system. Well, they have simple reflexes. They don't even have cortex. They don't have posterior cortex. They don't have prefrontal cortex. They have simple reflexes, which are good enough to communicate the direction toward food, the distance toward food, a lot of reflexes. Animals are successful because animals survive because they successfully solved the problems that were in front of them. So ants
Right.
can build big nests, and they do it without any prefrontal synthesis.
That's right.
Humans, since we have prefrontal synthesis, we would first think about it in the mind, and then we would have to build a model on the computer, and only then we would go and build a house. But ants can do it right away. In the same way, a lot of animals can communicate because they have reflexes.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Vyshedskiy, for coming and visiting with us and sharing us your insights. Let's give a round of applause once again.